episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor. Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show. Today, bringing you another really fascinating guest, helping to create a better tomorrow on many different fronts. Today, we have the honor of being joined by Dr. Nikos Loutas, who is the head of data and artificial intelligence policy at NATO headquarters in Belgium, where he has broad responsibility for policy development, coordination, and implementation of NATO's broad data exploitation policy and artificial intelligence strategies. Dr. Loutas has his bachelor's in science and computer science, his master's in information systems, both from Athens University of Economics and Business. He has his Ph.D. from the University of Macedonia. Prior to leading his current role at NATO, Dr. Loutas served as a policy officer in corporate data governance at the European Commission, as a data and analytics director at PricewaterhouseCoopers Belgium, helping organizations respond to various data management and analytics challenges and to improve their products and services, as well as a researcher at both the Digital Enterprise Research Institute and the Center for Research and Technology, LS in the Semantic Web, Web 3.0 field, which is another fascinating domain that hopefully we'll be talking a little bit about. But in the meantime, we have him on our show, Dr. Nikos Loutas. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us.
Thanks a lot for inviting me, Ira, and hi to everyone watching us.
It's great to have you. And Nikos, I would love to start things off like we typically do by handing you the floor for a little bit. If you could take us a bit on that early journey, everything from where you grew up, when you developed some of these interests in computer science and infotech, and a little bit of that career journey. I think that'd be a great way to start off. And at the same time, I took some opportunity to sort of look through your publication record, and you're really broadly published on a range of things. I was looking at your Ph.D. in terms of consumer-centric semantic service models. You worked in cancer chemo prevention models. Talk a little bit about how going through all that ultimately brings you to the current position at NATO, if you would.
All right, sure, yeah, I'd love to. Well, I'm Greek originally. I was born and raised in Athens, and I did there all my school years and everything. And actually, as from a very early stage, I'd say even before my teenage years, I started developing an interest in computer science. And that started, with the typical baby steps at school, where at the time, I think we would have, kind of MS-DOS interfaces, and we would be able to just program very, very basic stuff. And then, of course, having my first PC at home and being very excited about it. I remember I was super excited at the hard drive of 1 gigabyte, and I was like, oh, wow, that's so big. I mean, how am I ever gonna, fill it up? And then here we are today talking big data. So throughout my school years, I kept on, having this interest in math and science and obviously computer science. And then that's how I found my way to study actually computer science in a business university, which was let's say, a conscious choice, as conscious as you can make such a choice when you're 18 years old. But what actually was fascinating for me was the fact that computer science is so pervasive and it's actually everywhere. It's really ubiquitous. So I didn't want to study, let's say, computer science in the very kind of in an isolated context, but really see how can computer science be embedded in business, in government. And that was actually my initial interest. So like most of us, I finished my bachelor's degree and then also pursued a master's that was, again, along the same line. And then at some point, I had to take the decision, is it time for me to go and actually work in the private sector or do a PhD? And I had a keen interest on research, and during my master's, I participated as a student in a couple of research projects, doing my master's thesis and assignments and stuff like that. And I thought, well, you know what, it's actually now or never. So, I mean, I thought that if I would go into the private sector, it would be very hard for me to go back to school afterwards. So that's how I started my PhD, which was actually a super exciting journey and a long journey because I did a part-time PhD working in research at the same time between a Greek university in the north of the country and then an Irish university in Galway, Ireland. And that's actually how my, I would say, you know, my almost love relationship with the semantic web started. In a time actually back now in 2006 or 7 when the semantic web was something very exotic, I would say. Very few people had heard about it, and I was really lucky to be in an environment where the people that actually came up with it were sitting next to me in the office next door, or one floor up or one floor down. And you know, we first had to convince, we first of all had to explain to the world what is the semantic web, and why would you need it in a world when XML was very was prevailing. Data was perceived more as structured stuff, and then people would actually think, well, why do you need a semantic web? I mean, you do have XML and you can explain what your data is about. And so that's how I started working on my PhD, broader research area, which was the semantic web area, looking at how can I model data and make sure that data carries meaning with it, so that a computer can understand. And you know, the old classic example of Apple, the fruit versus Apple, the company, right? Yep. I mean, if a computer reads Apple, it's just a number. It's just a sequence of characters. It cannot understand if we're talking about Apple the company or Apple the fruit. So it was actually, yeah. I mean, I started working on that, and as I told you from the beginning, my interest has always been in combining research and with practice with business. And at that point in time, I had the opportunity to work in, I would say, at least for European standards, leading e-government group. And then we started looking at how can actually the semantic web be applied in the government context to make better public services, to make smarter public services, to help people provide their data only once, and help machines match make between people's profiles and available services and stuff like that. And again, you know, back in 2006, all that, or 2007, all that was really innovative. I mean, today, probably if somebody hears it, they're like, oh, well, come on, you know, that's kind of plain vanilla internet website behavior, but back then it wasn't really the case. So the institute that I was working at in Ireland, the Digital Enterprise Research Institute, that was the name at the time. It was then renamed to Insight Center for Data and Analytics. Had also a number of other domain-specific research groups, for example, one in health, and that's how then I also got involved into how can we apply semantic technology also to solve health-related problems and medical-related questions. And that's how, for example, I found my way into looking, okay, how can semantics help cancer chemoprevention research, or how can semantics, in another completely different context, help companies do better brand reputation management. So, and I really believe I was really blessed to be at this place at this time and be exposed to all those ideas, to all those brilliant people. Close to the end of my research work, and while I was wrapping up my PhD, I also realized that I wanted to move a bit closer to practice, and that's how I found myself in PricewaterhouseCoopers. So jumping from research into consultancy. I worked on several different management positions since I joined the firm, And the last couple of years, I was director for data and analytics. I was managing a big portfolio of projects, all related to data, AI, data management, both for big international clients, but also for some Belgian clients. And I have to say, we did some very cool projects. We did very innovative work. We did a lot of standardization work. We did a lot of strategy work for key organizations. And now, I mean, I have sometimes the luxury to use services that I helped design, and I think that's really something very fulfilling. And there seems to be a pattern in my career, and every 7 years I look for something different. So 7 years later, and after having a great time with the firm, I had the opportunity to work for the European Commission. As you probably know, the European Commission is headquartered here in Belgium, and I had the chance to work for the a Directorate General, which is called Secretariat General, and it's actually the presidential service. So it is the service of the Commission that coordinates the work of the Commission on behalf of the President. So you're really at the heart of the organization. And there I was working under the Chief Operating Officer of the Commission on implementing the Commission's data governance and data strategies. So the first thing I did was actually define data governance in the Commission, clarifying and setting up roles like you have everywhere, equals or equivalents of kind of a data governance board and data stewards and responsibilities and principles. And then we're actually putting all that into practice. And then out of the blue, this opportunity came to join NATO, which is also in Brussels. And actually, I joined NATO in August 2021, so like 6 months ago, as head of the data and AI policy unit. It's a unit which is positioned in a division which is called Emerging Security Challenges within NATO headquarters. And what we're actually doing there is, as you already said, defining policies and for AI and data, and then also helping kickstart the policy implementation and make sure that we're the catalyst so that the policies pick up, and then others will come and take over and make sure that full-scale implementation is gonna happen.
Got it. A fascinating journey, to say the least, and now really onto something even bigger with this new position. So I'm excited for you. Well, excited to listen to your story, but now thinking about all that you're going to be involved in. And Nikos, we a couple months ago we actually had you probably saw the episode with Serge Dedepo from the NATO Innovation Hub, which is actually located over here on the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. But you are there in Belgium. You are at NATO headquarters. Talk a little bit just about as you said, you're in a your data solutions group resides within the broader NATO headquarters there in Belgium. And we talked a little bit, the basic, if we go into sort of the basics of the NATO sort of military alliance, but walk us through a little bit, and we'll get into AI in a little while, but walk us through a little bit in terms of just who your customers are. I mean, do you get phone calls for, the Prime Minister of Hungary calls you up and say, hey, Dr. Loutas, we want you to work on this today. What's it all about? How do you decide what to do on any given day when you enter the office after you had your morning cup of coffee?
All right, sure. So as you already said, like NATO is an intergovernmental military alliance with 30 member nations on both sides of the Atlantic. So there's on the one hand Canada and the US, and then there's 28 counterparts in Europe. And actually the organization has been there since 1949. It has always been focusing on collective defense. This is what is in the heart of the alliance. And NATO's fundamental purpose is really to safeguard the freedom and the security of its members by political and by military means. What is very important, and it's also reflected actually in our AI strategy that I'll talk about later, is the fact that all NATO allies share and commit on common values, values related to individual liberty, to democracy, to human rights, and of course to the rule of law. And that these are all things that we take very seriously and drive the way we navigate ourselves to make sure that we contribute to peace and stability, that we deal effectively with crisis management, that we build our partnerships keeping that in mind. What is also very important for NATO, and it also played a fundamental role in the way our AI strategy and other data-related policies emerge, is the fact that NATO provides a forum where members can consult on any issue they choose to raise. They can take decisions which can affect both political and military matters. And practically there's this, how should I say, feeling of, comradeship and feeling of you're not alone, there's others there, other allies that can help you deal with a question, deal with a problem. So in that context, actually, my unit is positioned within, as you said, the NATO headquarters, within what we call the international staff, so the civilian staff of NATO. Mm-hmm. So all my staff members, including myself, were civilians. And what we do is that we work very closely together with the representatives of the NATO allies in the headquarters, which, I mean, you can imagine that in the NATO headquarters, you have something like 30 what we call delegations, which is kind of mini embassies. So mm-hmm. each country has a presence there. They have their representation there, and then different people come together in different committee formats to discuss different topics. Mm-hmm. So there is, for example, a committee that is discussing data. There's another one that is discussing AI, and there we, as international staff, make sure that we facilitate the discussions between the allies, that we provide input to those discussions, that we help draft strategies and policies, and then that we also help those strategies and policies be implemented. And this practically means that we're in close and constant contact and collaboration with them, listening to what are their concerns and priorities, helping find consensus, because when you have 30 allies, it's not always obvious. It's only healthy and normal to have sometimes conflict, to have different interests or priorities, and then you need somebody to help you find a common ground. That's where we help, and then, as I said, make sure that those things also find their way to implementation and they don't remain a piece of paper.
And drilling down from that, it was only recently, it was back October, I think 21st this year, most recent year, NATO releases the strategy for artificial intelligence. The summary is on your website, but a very broad program outlining how artificial intelligence can and should be applied to defense and security, also setting these important standards in terms of responsible use. Once again, you mentioned the themes of sort of consensus building, and talk a little bit about sort of why this report was put together, sort of how it came together. And again, I'm sitting here, I'm listening to a Greek AI expert here, and now the Greek AI expert has to sit between the representative from Portugal and the one from Norway or wherever that have totally different interests in AI. Tell us some interesting stories, anecdotes, anything along the way as you've been involved in this AI strategy that may be interesting to the audience, and how you once again build a consensus and try to keep fighting to a minimum.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and there I would also like to say that the AI strategy was endorsed together with a sister policy, mm-hmm. which is what we call the data exploitation policy, which looks at how can NATO treat its data as a strategic asset and make most of its data. In addition to AI, because the way we see it currently, AI is the most advanced way of exploiting data. But of course, there's also other ways of doing that, and we wanted to have a holistic view of looking at it. So, well, as you explained, there's different interests. There are different views. our role as staff members is, of course, to be independent, to promote the benefit and the interest of the alliance as a whole, and therefore, actually, in such discussions that can be chaired by me or by my superiors, we are not wearing our national hat. So I'm not in such a discussion representing the interests of Greece because I'm Greek, or Belgium because I live in Belgium, but actually I'm representing the views and the interests of the alliance. And that is something very important that we always keep in mind whenever we as staff members have to chair such meetings. And then, of course, you have all the countries that come there, each of them not only with different interests, but each of them also being at a different level of maturity. When you talk about something that new as artificial intelligence, it's only normal that you will have some front runners, you will have some that are working on it, you will have others that are not working on it because they don't have the expertise, or because it's not even a priority for them, and maybe they have other political priorities to deal first. So the first thing that we try to do in those contexts is make sure we have some sort of a level playing field, and that we have drafts of the strategy that express the common views and the common interests. And of course, what happens is that those drafts go through several iterations where all the countries have the chance, either during meetings or offline, to raise concerns or add input that we then process and create a new draft and so on and so forth. What we've seen is that this happens, of course, always in a very constructive and respectful way. And what we also saw is that when the discussions are so important, like data or AI, then countries really tap also into their local experts, and then you get a lot of insights and a lot of knowledge that it wouldn't be possible to have just within the building and the walls of the headquarters. So that was also a great thing to look at. And what was also important for the AI strategy, in particular, having a public summary, was that we also wanted to put, to leave our mark and say, you know what, of course, everybody says now that they're working on AI. The difference with NATO is that we are the first ones to come up with an AI strategy representing 30 allies in the defense and security context. So that's something really that we're very proud of, because it is a very sensitive area, and it's not an easy thing to do. And of course, once we did that, we also wanted to make sure that people know about it, not just knowing the headline, but can also look into what are the objectives of this strategy, what are the principles that we're putting forward, and the commitments that we're making in order to implement artificial intelligence for the benefits of the alliance, but of course responsibly.
And speaking of responsibility, you have a comprehensive responsible use charter that you've created within the report: lawfulness, responsibility and accountability, explainability and traceability, reliability, governability and bias mitigation. I think this is an extremely important part, and obviously this is one area that people get very concerned about in terms of AI, and you really have, and you've done a very comprehensive job here, and again, of outlining all these critical issues, putting the technology itself aside. Talk about the development of these principles per the NATO document.
So the principles have emerged based on discussion and looking, of course, at other similar sets of principles that have been created either by other international or intergovernmental organizations, but also by governments, big software or private sector companies, and so on and so forth. And of course, if you compare all different principles that are out there, you can find, I would say, you can find commonalities, you can find common ground, and that that makes a lot of sense, and that also, I think, explains the concerns of people about AI. AI being really, a kind of how should I say, a technology that is of dual use, right? It
Yep.
has military uses, it has civilian uses, and we actually see that regardless of whether we're talking about a military context or a civilian context, people seem to have the same concerns in mind, and these are actually expressed in principles that are comparable. And that's how we came up with those 6 principles in our strategy. Some of them, of course, are there, and I would say are what I would call a no-brainer. I mean, if you have an intergovernmental organization, you have to talk about lawfulness. I mean, the rule of law and making sure international law is respected is not negotiable. You have others that you would find also in the private sector very often, like bias mitigation, governability, explainability, and so on and so forth. What is very important for us is actually, and even more important, I would say, than defining the 6 principles, is putting them in practice. And that is what we're working on at the moment. So we've gone past the first milestone. We now have agreed on those 6 principles, and now we're exploring what are the best ways of operationalizing those principles. And this means what is the best governance model that we can put in place in order to make sure that AI developed by NATO or for NATO implements and respects those 6 principles. But then also, what are the necessary technology investments or the necessary standards or other norms that we need to agree on and define, or policies, I don't know what, to make sure that those principles are implemented. Just to give you an idea, I mean, if we talk about explainability, we know very well that today there are certain types of machine learning models that are explainable. And then there are other types of machine learning models like neural networks or multi-variant support vector machines that are harder to explain. And this means that we need to work together with civil organizations, with research organizations, with private sector, to create or to have access to tools that would help us, explain, for example, this kind of algorithms when they have to be used. What we've also looked a lot at when implementing the principles is that currently innovation in AI happens a lot within the civilian world. This is where you have all sorts of startups, researchers, companies developing things, standards organizations. So we've seen a huge potential for us to start interacting and having our voice heard in fora that are not the traditional NATO fora with our traditional interlocutors. We are engaging with standards organization. We're engaging with civilian intergovernmental organizations. We're engaging with the startup ecosystem, also through our Defense Innovation Accelerator initiative. So all those things, I mean, they're happening as we're talking. It's a very fast-moving environment and very exciting, but all is actually targeted towards what I said from the very beginning, that we're very committed to make sure that this strategy and those principles don't remain on paper, but are actually implemented in whatever we do from now onwards.
And speaking about sort of the startup ecosystem, we do a lot of episodes on the show with the young innovators, whether they're the new startups or maybe haven't been spun out of the university lab or so forth yet. I know the document mentions something about NATO artificial intelligence test centers. How is if I'm a CEO of a young startup or working in a university lab and I want to work with you or your team at NATO, what are some of the opportunities available there from both, as you mentioned, some of the sort of either the grant making processes or working collaborating with the AI test centers? Walk us through a little bit about that.
So there are indeed both possibilities. On the one hand, the strategy talks about the setup of a defense innovation accelerator for a North Atlantic.
Yep.
We can see this as something like an innovation fund, practically, where NATO would be able to co-fund or co-finance startups to develop technology that is also useful for NATO and for the purposes of NATO. The modalities of doing that and the modalities of managing the fund are currently being negotiated. And in parallel, indeed, we're also talking about a federated network of national test centers for AI, but also for other types of emerging and disruptive technologies. And there, the use can be dual. On the one hand, if a startup has a technology or a model that could be useful for NATO, we could find a place there for them to test it and for us to try it out. But what is also interesting there for us is to give the opportunity to the allies to share infrastructure for developing or for testing and assessing AI. And among others, why not to share also test data, which are so hard to collect and so expensive to collect and maintain. Share possibly models that could be relevant for more than one of our allies. And again, all those modalities are currently being negotiated.
Outstanding. Nikos, at the beginning, in your introduction, one of the things you brought up was your interest in efficiency of government. You've published in the past on some of your technological interest in terms of e-government. And one of the very interesting topics that I've seen you write about is our smart cities. We just did an episode a couple weeks ago with the folks that are involved in constructing this NEOM in Saudi Arabia. Now, Saudi Arabia is not part of NATO per se, but very interesting, a very big figure, smart city approach, starting from scratch in the middle of the desert. But I know, taking you a little bit away from defense and security for a moment, but talk a little bit, as you see, obviously, the use of these tools in the NATO environment. Coming back to some of your other interests, talk about some of your visions for things like smart cities and ultimately the application of tools like artificial intelligence in these processes.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, sure. I mean, I always find it, very, very exciting. And I think today we can actually say that we live in cities that are, well, probably not super smart, but they're probably much, much smarter compared to the city that I grew up, like 30 or 20 years ago. So a lot has happened. And if you see today all around us, on the one hand, public administration has made significant steps to modernize the way they manage their work, but also significant investments are being made in order to make sure that our cities can actually be smart. I mean, we're talking about optic fiber networks that, I mean, for a smart city, you need reliable and high-speed internet. We're talking about 5G and how this is going to unlock a lot of new services within a smart cities context. We've seen all cities piloting driverless buses, and their AI and all the dilemmas that come with it are coming. Driverless metros are kind of a thing of the past already, right?
Right.
Probably in Europe a bit less, but it's happening all the time. For me, I see two main let's say areas where I believe a lot of development can happen in the smart city context still. The one is the whole area of the citizen being really perceived as a customer today, and you see that this is changing a lot. Governments really see now today their citizens as customers. I mean, in like 20 years ago, maybe you would have a bank thinking about customer 360 and what I know about my customer. Today, public administrations often invest in having this kind of comprehensive view of their citizens and being able to combine data from different sources and administrations to provide better services. So the whole area of service provision for the citizen, I think, is going to be to advance much faster, with AI coming also. That would change a lot, I think, the way citizens interact with governments. I mean, I've been and I actually would have expected it to have gone even faster, but I understand the privacy concerns. But imagine how much of our interaction with the government can be replaced or simplified by conversational agents, by chatbots, and how this can actually really help, especially people that have visual impairments or older people who don't find it always that easy to start typing on a mobile phone or using a laptop. So privacy is on the one hand something, a key consideration. On the other hand, ease of use for me is a very big thing. And I think this is going to change things a lot. It will also change things a lot because we see that there is an area where I would say the hard border between what the private sector would do and the public sector would do is becoming more blurry. And in Europe, where, I mean, in the US, the social system and the setup was different. So maybe it's not such a how should I say? Maybe the difference is not that remarkable. But in Europe, it's often much more remarkable because we did have really a Chinese wall between private and somehow social and the public sector. Just to give you an example, we see, for example, more and more governments relying on the electronic identification mechanisms of private businesses like banks, so that people can authenticate and use public services. In the future, you could also think how you could blur much more the boundary between your banking system and your whatever citizen system. And then if you think in a smarter city context where you would have sensors literally everywhere, not just cameras, like traffic cameras as today, but literally sensors that would help give you access to smart services, I think this can give a lot of new opportunities. So that's for me clearly one area where I see the change, and the other is the whole area of climate change and how this is going to impact our cities, and how can smart cities help there, for example, by having better solutions for mobility, more integrated mobility between a use of a car, public transport, a taxi, and stuff like that, things that could be connected, and I can have more seamless communication of the different platforms. So then also all sorts of energy saving solutions in the context of smart cities for public space, but then also for private space, and then also possibly in certain cases smart cities that could benefit of real-time data and sensor data to prevent or to inform people of potential hazards that could be a result of climate change. So that's also something I think is probably an area that will come up faster.
Excellent. And continuing along these lines, obviously now putting your computer science hat on, next generation disruptive technologies on the computer side. We've dabbled a little bit in themes like edge computing, quantum computing, neurotechnologies. What get other areas of sort of the next generation of computing get you excited when you think about potential synergies with some of what you're doing in the data and artificial intelligence sciences?
I think the no-brainer would be to say quantum, so I'm not actually going to talk about quantum. I think for me what would be a game changer for especially for our private lives and also for our professional lives to a certain extent, would be augmented reality, for sure. I mean, the fact that we now have access to so much data and information, and we have also access to so strong personal devices, can really, you know, open up opportunities to augmented reality. I mean, there have been some examples in the past that didn't really succeed. If I think of the Google glasses that, you know, were taken out of the market and things like that, but probably that was too soon. And if I, for example, think of self-driving cars and things like that, then augmented reality solutions for me would change things a lot. If I think about how augmented reality can I don't know, change our experience as tourists, or our experience when consuming certain services, or when walking on the street, and how we can receive directions. All those things I think are very exciting. And the other one, and if I think about the COVID pandemic, you know, it could have helped in certain cases. I think is also virtual reality. And I remember when I was still at PricewaterhouseCoopers, we had actually done a study together with a consumer organization, and we've seen already back then, and that's already like almost 5 years ago, companies in the retail industry and in the fashion industry experimenting with virtual shops, where practically you had an empty room, all, you know, like white walls, 4 white walls, and you would go in with a pair of goggles, and then you would see this as the flagship store of brand XYZ, and then you would be able to try out things and stuff like that. So I think there's a huge potential there, and of course this whole you know, shift of interest towards the metaverse, not only with Facebook's move, but more generally, I think also confirms that you know, people are looking at that, and that serious investments are happening in that area.
Excellent. And while I have you, Nikos, there's been this really rich guy over here in the U.S. Named Musk or something like that, who's launching rocket ships and all sorts of things, and he's constantly talking about AI, apocalypse. Take a couple of minutes to, if I brought him on the show here to debate you, and also tell the audience why AI is not the end of the world, but offers us a very bright future on many fronts.
So, I mean, it's one of my favorite questions, right? And of course, when you talk to people about things that scare them, it attracts attention, and you get people's attention. So, of course, the easiest thing to do is to go out and say, you know what, AI is all about killer robots and killer cars, and all of us will be unemployed, and I don't know what. But I think that's not constructive, and it's not at all like that. It's a bit similar to me, like comparing AI development to an arms race, and then all of a sudden say, well, AI is a weapon. Well, actually, it's not a weapon. It's a technology. It can be used for different purposes. I truly believe that the positive somehow use of AI and the beneficial use cases and the benefits that we can get far outweigh the risks. Of course, we should not be naive, and there are risks, and that is why we're working on regulating AI. We're talking about AI principles. We're talking about assessing those principles, of course. But I mean, I don't want to make a very simplified example, but you know, you can drive, let's take the car, right? I mean, the car is essentially something good. It helps us go from A to B easier. Of course, the car also can kill someone or can kill the driver, and also creates pollution. But does it mean we should just stop using the car, or try to make a better car or a safer car? And for me, it's the same thing as with AI. You know, one of my previous bosses was saying that when the refrigerator got invented, the people that were going around houses selling ice lost their jobs. Of course, it didn't stop people from going to the refrigerator, buying refrigerators, but it meant that people had to be upskilled or reskilled. And probably 200 years ago, we were not as wise, or we were not as capable, or I don't know what. But today we know better. So we need to make sure that no one is left behind, especially when it comes to technologies like AI. That, I mean, we know by default that we cannot stop them. What we can do is we can guide them and make sure we use them properly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Nikos, while I have you, you have a fascinating story. You've had no doubt met many amazing people along the way at your time in academia, in the private sector, in these multinational institutions. Take a couple minutes, if you would, just to talk about some of your mentors, the people that along the way have been very influential in guiding you, have kept you on this path. It can be family, friends, teachers. Take a few minutes just to walk us through a few names that have really been there with you along this journey.
Sure. I mean, I think the first person that would come in mind is the person that somehow did the day-to-day supervision of my PhD, and with whom I had the luck to work together later on in the commission. So our paths have crossed many times. And yeah, his name is Vasilios Peristeras, and I mean, I owe him a lot, because first of all, he, when you're 23 or 24, you have no clue what it means to be a researcher, right? Mm-hmm. So he actually explained first of all to me what's the job and what are the expectations, and how do you turn wild ideas into something more practical that is called research, and understandable. Yep. and useful. And he was also the person that because of his career and working with him a lot, also showed me that there's never just one way. Mm-hmm. In your career, you will have a million decision points, and every time you need to decide, do I want to go left or right, and this will take you somewhere else. And it's always for the best. It's so enriching to change also organizations sometimes, and then do different things, or do the same thing, whatever one prefers. So clearly one would be him. And then the second one would be one of my previous bosses at PricewaterhouseCoopers, and now a friend for sure, Floris Ampe. He was one of the senior partners in the firm when I was there. And well, I mean, he taught me, first of all, what is business and how you do business. And that's very important. He's a very bright person. He taught me, that when you talk about something, you have to understand it enough. You should not just be blabbing. And he also taught me to be bold and take risks. And he would always say, you know what, it's how he would say, yeah, he would say, better ask for forgiveness than for permission. and that's something that has really stayed with me, because of course, if you always wait to ask for permission, you end up, wasting a lot of time. And in 99% of the times, people will tell you, go ahead, unless you say something, you're an unreasonable person. So voila, better ask for forgiveness than for permission has taken me a long way, and working with him has taught me a lot.
Excellent message for all of us. Nikos, really a fascinating story, and I'm going to be wishing you the best with as this new position, watching your journey and continuing to do what you do. For everybody, that is going to be listening to this particular episode across the podcast networks or watching on the YouTube channel. Once again, you've been listening to Dr. Nikos Loutas, Head of Data and Artificial Intelligence Policy at NATO headquarters in Belgium. Nikos, once again, thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come talk to us. Thanks for everything you're doing to keep the world safe and efficient and progressing forward. And as we like to say on this show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for all of us. A really great story.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the conversation. I appreciate the invitation to talk on your channel.
Absolutely. Good seeing you.